Dean Martin was precisely halfway through the second verse of That's Amore when he saw it. It wasn't pointed at him. Not yet. It was just resting on the white linen tablecloth, gleaming under the ambient light of the Copa room, a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver, dark and ugly against the pristine fabric. It sat directly in front of a man in the center of the front row. A man whose name you whispered in the back alleys of Las Vegas, but never, ever spoke out loud in a crowded room. Dean stopped singing. The words died in his throat. The band, confused, kept playing for a few awkward bars before trailing off into a discordant silence. The audience, 2,800 souls packed into the Sands Hotel, sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure and held their collective breath. The room became so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. And then, Dean Martin did something that would either cement his legend forever or get him killed within the next 60 seconds. He didn't run. He didn't call for security. He walked straight to the edge of the stage, knelt down until he was face to face with the man, and held out his microphone. To truly understand the insanity, and the brilliance, of that moment, you have to understand Las Vegas in 1965. It wasn't the corporate, family-friendly Disneyland with slot machines that it is today. It was the Wild West in tuxedos. It was a city owned, operated, and policed by organized crime. The casinos, the hotels, the linen services, the liquor distribution, even the shows, everything ran through the outfit, the mob, the syndicate. Everyone knew the rules. You performed, you entertained, you got paid well, and you kept your mouth shut. And above all, you never crossed the men who really ran the town. The Sands Hotel, Dean's home base, was no exception. It was practically a monument to mob influence. Frank Sinatra thrived in this environment. He understood the hierarchy, paid his respects, and played the game. The rest of the Rat Pack, Sammy, Peter, Joey, they all fell in line. Dean Martin understood it too. Better than most. He hadn't grown up in Beverly Hills. He was Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, a gritty steel town where organized crime wasn't a movie plot, it was part of the civic landscape. His father, Gaetano, was a barber, but the back room of his shop was a hub for illegal gambling and numbers running. Dean had been dealing blackjack and running dice games since he was a teenager. He knew these men. He knew the cadence of their speech, the weight of their silence. He knew that in their world, fear was blood in the water. You survived by knowing your place, but you thrived by never showing weakness. And Dean Martin had something most performers didn't, a complete, almost pathological lack of fear when it came to being on stage. To him, the stage wasn't a place of anxiety, it was his living room. He didn't care if you liked the act. He was there to sing a few songs, tell a few jokes, have a drink, and get paid. If you didn't like it, that was your problem. This attitude was his armor. But on June 18, 1965, that armor would be tested by a man who didn't care about jokes. The trouble had started 3 days earlier, on a Tuesday. Dean was in his dressing room at the Sands, nursing a J&B and reading a comic book, when there was a sharp knock at the door. His assistant, a nervous young kid named Jackie Romano, opened it. Standing in the hallway was a man Dean didn't know, wearing a suit that cost more than Jackie's car. Jackie recognized him immediately, and the blood drained from his face. "Mr. Martin," the man said, his voice smooth as polished concrete, not waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Vincent Antonelli would like to speak with you after your show tonight. In private." Dean didn't look up from his comic book. He turned a page slowly. "Tell Mr. Antonelli I'm pretty tired after shows these days. My back acts up. Maybe another time." The man's expression didn't flicker. It was a statue's face. "Mr. Antonelli insists." Dean finally set down the comic book and stood up. He walked over to the door, smelling of cologne and cigarette smoke, and looked the man directly in the eyes. There was no Dino the drunk act now. His eyes were clear and cold. Tell Mr. Antonelli that Dean Martin doesn't take meetings with people who send messengers. If he wants to talk to me, he knows where I am. He can come to my dressing room himself and ask nicely. Like a gentleman. The man stared at Dean for a long beat, assessing him. Then he nodded, a microscopic movement. I'll deliver your message. After the door closed, Jackie was shaking so hard he could barely hold a glass. Dean, are you crazy? Do you know who that was? That was Vincent Antonelli's right hand. You can't just blow him off like he's an autograph seeker. Dean shrugged, picked up his drink, and went back to his chair. I can and I did, Jackie. I don't work for the mob. I work for the Sands. And last I checked, I'm the one selling out 2 shows a night here, not Vincent Antonelli. He wants something, he can come ask me. Jackie tried to explain, his voice squeaking with terror. Vincent the Chin Antonelli wasn't just a connected guy. He was an enforcer for the Chicago outfit's Nevada operations. He had a reputation for violence that was legendary even by mob standards. He'd been linked to at least a dozen disappearances in the desert, though nothing ever stuck. When Vincent Antonelli wanted a meeting, you didn't send regrets. You showed up. But Dean wasn't interested in their hierarchy. He'd drawn a line in the sand years ago, he would be an entertainer, not an employee. He'd seen what happened to guys who got too cozy with the mob, they ended up owning you. Dean Martin refused to be owned. The next night, Wednesday, June 16th, the same messenger appeared after the late show. Mr. Antonelli is waiting downstairs in the lounge. He'd like to speak with you now. Dean was removing his bow tie in the mirror. Tell Mr. Antonelli I already left for the night. The messenger blinked. But Mr. Martin, you're right here. Dean smiled that lazy, half-lidded smile in the reflection. Am I? Could have sworn I was halfway to Palm Springs by now. Must be a mirage. The messenger's jaw tightened. Mr. Martin, I don't think you understand the situation. Dean spun around. No, pal. I understand perfectly. I understand that I just worked my ass off for 2 hours entertaining people. I understand that I'm tired. And I understand that I'm going to my room to have a drink and go to sleep. Now, you can stand there and argue with me, or you can deliver my message to your boss. Your choice. The messenger left without another word. The air in the dressing room was toxic with tension. By Thursday, June 17th, the rumor mill at the Sands was churning. Word was out that Vincent Antonelli was angry. And an angry Antonelli was a civic problem in Las Vegas. Casino staff who were on the mob's payroll quietly warned Dean's people that he needed to make peace, and fast. That evening, Dean's manager, Herman Citron, a man who lived in a perpetual state of anxiety, burst into the dressing room. Dean, I'm begging you. Just take the meeting. 5 minutes. Kiss the ring. What does he want? Dean asked, genuinely bored by the drama. Herman hesitated. I'm not sure. But I heard it has something to do with his girlfriend. A dancer at the Tropicana. Apparently, she's been talking about leaving Vegas and going to Hollywood to try acting. Vincent thinks you've been encouraging her. Maybe promised her an audition. Dean laughed, a genuine, throaty laugh. I've never even met the broad. I don't know what he's talking about. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Herman practically screamed. Vincent believes it. In his world, perception is reality. Just meet with him. Apologize. Tell him you'll never talk to her again. Lick his boots if you have to. Dean shook his head. I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do, Herman. And I don't lick boots. I wear them. If Vincent Antonelli has a problem with me, he can bring it up like a man, face to face. Not through messengers and threats. Herman left, defeated, knowing his client was walking into a buzzsaw. Friday, June 18, 1965. The day of reckoning. Dean arrived at the sands around 6 p.m. The atmosphere in the back of the house was suffocating. Security guards were edgy. Waitresses were whispering in corners. You could feel the static charge in the air. At 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes before curtain, Jackie rushed into the dressing room, looking like he was going to be sick. "Dean, you need to cancel tonight's show. Claim laryngitis. Claim a heart attack. Anything." "Why would I do that?" Dean asked, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. Vincent Antonelli bought out the first 3 rows. Him and about 20 of his guys. They're out there right now. Waiting. Dean didn't even pause. So they paid for tickets? Good. That makes them audience members like anybody else. Hope they buy a lot of drinks. Dean, this isn't a joke. They're not here to be entertained. They're here to send a message. Or worse. Dean turned from the mirror, his tuxedo immaculate, his face calm. Then I guess I better put on a hell of a show, huh? Come on, Jackie. Let's go to work. At 9 p.m. sharp, the house lights dimmed, the orchestra swelled, and the announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Sands Hotel proudly presents Dean Martin." Dean walked onto the stage of the Copa Room. The applause was deafening, a wall of sound. He smiled that million-watt smile, waved to the balcony, did his usual drunk routine, stumbling slightly, swirling his glass of apple juice. "How did I get here?" he slurred into the mic, and the crowd roared. But his eyes were scanning the room. And there they were. The first 3 rows were a sea of dark suits, slicked back hair, and hard faces. It looked like a convention of undertakers. And in the center, right at ringside table 1, sat Vincent Antonelli. He was massive, a mountain of a man in a tailored silk suit. His face was a roadmap of violence, scarred, pockmarked, with eyes that were dead and cold, like a shark's. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't clapping. He was just staring at Dean, radiating menace. Dean went into his act. He sang, "Ain't That a Kick in the Head," moving with that feline grace, working the room. But his eyes kept drifting back to Antonelli. The mobster was an anchor dragging down the energy in the room. The people at the surrounding tables noticed the tension, the laughter was a little more brittle, the applause a little quicker. Dean finished the song. Thank you," he said, taking a drag from his cigarette. "You're too kind. Although I noticed some of you down in front here seem a little contemplative tonight. Don't worry, I won't take it personally. I know it's hard to clap when you're busy planning a heist." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. The men in the front rows didn't move a muscle. Antonelli just stared. Dean moved into a ballad, "Memories Are Made of This." About halfway through the song, Antonelli moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket. Dean saw the movement. For a fraction of a second, his voice wavered, a tiny crack in the facade. Was this it? Was he going to pull a gun right here in front of 3,000 people? But Antonelli didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a silver cigarette case. He opened it, removed a cigarette, tapped it on the case, and lit it with a gold lighter. The flame flared in the darkness. He took a long drag, blew a plume of smoke directly toward the stage, and then, he did it. With the cigarette held between 2 fingers, Vincent Antonelli slowly, deliberately, drew his thumb across his throat in a slicing motion. It wasn't subtle. It was a death threat, clear as day. Dean saw it. The band saw it. The people at the surrounding tables saw it. A gasp rippled through the front of the room. That was the moment. That was the precipice. Most performers would have crumbled. They would have called security, run off stage, or just frozen in terror. But Dean Martin wasn't most performers. He was a gambler from Steubenville who knew when to bluff and when to double down. He stopped singing. He motioned for the band to stop. The music died. The Copa room became a vacuum of sound. 2,800 people holding their breath, waiting for the violence to start. Dean stood at center stage, the spotlight hitting his tuxedo, smoke curling from the cigarette in his hand. He looked down at Antonelli. The silence stretched for 5, 10 seconds, an eternity. And then, Dean Martin smiled. Not his stage smile. A real, genuine, you gotta be kidding me, smile. Folks, he said into the microphone, his voice calm and conversational, we're going to take a little break from the planned program here. See, there's a gentleman in the front row who seems to have something he wants to get off his chest. He started walking toward the edge of the stage. The air in the room was so tight it felt like it might snap. Antonelli sat perfectly still, smoke curling around his massive head. Dean reached the edge of the stage, directly in front of the mobster. He knelt down on one knee, bringing himself eye to eye with the killer. Sir, Dean said, the microphone amplifying his calm voice through the silent cavern of the room, I notice you've been sitting there making gestures at me all night. Now, I'm not sure if you're trying to tell me something, or if you're just practicing for a barbershop quartet audition, but it's a little distracting to the other paying customers. The room was paralyzed. This was suicide. You didn't talk to Vincent Antonelli like that. You certainly didn't mock him on stage. Dean continued, his eyes locked on Antonelli's. So, here's what I'm thinking. If you've got something to say, why don't you come up here and say it to everybody? And then, Dean did the unthinkable. He extended his arm and offered the microphone to Vincent Antonelli. In fact, why don't you come up here and sing a few bars? You got the look. Maybe you got the voice. What do you say, Pauli? The stage is yours. Time stopped. The entire universe seemed to shrink down to the space between Dean Martin's hand and Vincent Antonelli's face. The mobster stared at the microphone as if it were a live grenade. His men in the rows behind him were tense, hands reaching inside jackets, waiting for a signal. Antonelli looked at the microphone. Then he looked up at Dean. He saw the lack of fear in Dean's eyes. He saw a man who was calling his bluff in the most public way possible. It was a showdown of wills. Steubenville versus Chicago. The silence stretched on. And then, a sound broke it. It was a low, rumbling sound, like rocks grinding together in a mixer. Vincent Antonelli was laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, terrifying sound. But it was a laugh. He looked at Dean, kneeling there with that stupid grin, offering him the spotlight. You got balls, Martin, Antonelli said, his gravelly voice loud enough to be heard in the silent room. I'll give you that. You got serious stones. Dean didn't blink. Is that a yes on the singing? Because I gotta warn you, the band only knows my key. Antonelli shook his massive head, a slow grin spreading across his scarred face. Nah. You keep singing, Dean. That's what you're good at. I'll stick to my day job. Dean stood up slowly. You sure? Offer stands. We could do a duet. Me and my shadow? Antonelli laughed again. I'm sure. You're all right, kid. Go on. Finish your show. Dean nodded, gave a little salute, and walked back to center stage. The tension in the room broke like a fever. Dean picked up his drink, raised it to the audience, and said, well, folks, looks like you're stuck with me tonight. But let's hear it for my friend in the front row. He's a tough critic, but he knows talent when he sees it. The audience, still processing that they hadn't just witnessed a murder, applauded nervously. Antonelli raised his glass in a mock toast. Dean turned to the band. Where the hell were we? Oh yeah. When the moon hits your eye. He launched back into the song as if nothing had happened. For the next hour, he was flawless. He sang, he joked, he owned the room. Antonelli and his men stayed until the final bow, and when the curtain came down, they stood and applauded. An hour later, there was a knock on Dean's dressing room door. Jackie opened it, and Vincent Antonelli walked in alone. "Can I come in?" he grunted. Dean was sitting in his chair, smoking. "Sure. Want a drink?" "I got scotch, bourbon, and whatever this is." He held up his glass of apple juice. Antonelli sat heavily on the couch. "Scotch. Neat." Dean poured the drinks. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Antonelli spoke. "You know why I was mad at you? The girl. The dancer." Dean nodded. "I heard. For the record, Vince, I don't know her. Never met her." Antonelli nodded. "I know. I checked. She was lying to make me jealous. It worked. I handled it." Dean didn't ask what that meant. "So why the drama?" Dean asked. "Why send the goons 3 times? Antonelli took a sip of his scotch. "Because you blew me off, Martin. You disrespected me. In my world, you can't let that slide. I had to come down here and see what you were made of. See if you were just another Hollywood phony." He looked Dean in the eye. "You're not. What you did out there tonight, most guys would have pissed their pants. You walked right up to the fire. I respect that." Dean swirled his drink. "I figured if you were gonna kill me, you were gonna do it anyway. Might as well make it a good show." Antonelli actually smiled. "Fair point. We're good, Dean. You and me. You're good people." They finished their drinks, shook hands, and Antonelli left. He never bothered Dean again. In fact, he became a regular at the shows, always in the front row, Dean's unofficial protector. That night changed something in Las Vegas. It was the moment the entertainers realized they didn't have to be victims. Dean had shown them that courage could be a currency as valuable as cash. Frank called him the next day, frantic. "Are you crazy? He could have clipped you right there." Dean just laughed. "He could have, Frank. But he didn't. Because I didn't let him think he could scare me. These guys are bullies. You stand up to them, they back down." Dean never bragged about it. When asked, he'd just shrug and say, "I didn't want him ruining my set." But everyone knew the truth. On June 18, 1965, Dean Martin didn't just put on a show. He stared down the devil himself, handed him a microphone, and walked away the king.